Welcome. Welcome to Herbs Beyond Basil. My name is Marianne Simon. I am an instructor with G3 Green Gardens. I've been landscaping goodness for over 2 decades now. And it's actually herbs that got me into this world. It's definitely an entry point into landscaping. So we say that we want to welcome you to the world of herbs because our relationship with herbs goes back to the very, very beginning. Our relationship in terms of how herbs were used in foods, how they were used in ritual, how they were used in healing for certain. And we'll actually be talking about all of that in tonight's presentation. So probably the way that we are the most accustomed to using herbs is as flavoring. So taking foods that are potentially not very exciting to the taste buds and then spicing them up or making them more interesting or more flavorful. And herbs that are used for that purpose, we will definitely be taking a closer look at that as we go along. And then right along with that is the way that herbs have been used, again, from the very, very beginning, as ways of healing. So the idea that these plants actually have multiple purposes so that you can pick a spice or pick an herb and you can flavor your foods with it, but you can also make a tea with it to ease an upset stomach or to help with a headache or whatever. This idea that these plants have multiple ways of being used by us humans. And the way that we used plants to make our clothing and our materials more interesting and more dynamic. So with dyes, with different fibers that we learned to weave together, really, really expanding our creative opportunities. And then, of course, the way that herbs are used in ritual, in spirituality, in religion. So just depending on what your belief systems are, the different ways that herbs can then be integrated to support that type of work in the world. So the way we're going to go through tonight's class is there's 6 different pieces of the puzzle. So we're going to start out with the basics, and we call it watershed-wise basics. I'll explain what that is in just a moment. But the idea that basically herbs are plants, and well, not basically, they are plants, and that the way that we create a resilient, thriving landscape with herbs applies to whatever it is that we are planting in the garden. Number 2 is then taking a closer look at different types of herbs. Number 3 is what are some of the different themes that you can organize or design a garden with herbs. Number 4 is actually selecting your herbs, and it's selecting those herbs with water conservation in mind. So again, looking at it through that particular lens. Number 5, I know some of you are interested in starting gardens, how you can go ahead and grow and propagate your own herb garden. And then number 6, some of the different ways that you can prepare your herbs or store your herbs or dry your herbs so that you can use them for different uses. Now, we use the word herbs and spices pretty interchangeably. Same plant, but it can be used in different ways. So when we're talking about herbs, we tend to be talking about the leafy or the fleshy part of the plant. When we're talking about spices, we're now talking about seeds, stems, the woody part of that plant. So let's begin with this first piece of the puzzle, which is watershed-wise basics. So first off, a watershed is described as an area of land where all of the water that drains over it or flows under it goes to the same place. So you can imagine you've got a river and the mountains, and all of the water that falls on that river that falls on the mountains, makes its way into the river, all goes into that one body of water. And the area that captures all of that rainwater is considered that area's watershed. So when we look at this image now, this is a balanced watershed. We've got our precipitation, it falls to the ground. Some of that water will drain overland into our body of water, in this case, a river. Some of that water will make its way into the soil. And there it is cleaned and filtered by the plant roots and by the biology in the soil. And then from there, some of that water will move sideways into the river, and some of that water will actually percolate on down, and that is how we replenish our aquifers. And then the water evaporates or evapotranspires, goes back up into the sky, and we start that process all over again. So we want you to look at your property as a mini watershed. Now, on the left, we have what we would call a conventional landscape. Oftentimes there's turf there, maybe you've got some trees, maybe a few shrubs, but odds are it is a landscape that is struggling a little bit. Maybe you don't get quite the yield that you were hoping for. And really what we want to do is inspire you to create a watershed-wise landscape. So the 4 key principles of that are: 1, growing that healthy living soil sponge, so that when we get that rain, or even when we irrigate, we're holding on to that water and then releasing it to the plants as they need it. Number 2 is selecting climate appropriate plants. And we will be taking a closer look at those climate appropriate plants in just a minute. Number 3 is holding on to the rainwater, keeping it on the property so it doesn't run off. And the number 4 is highly efficient irrigation, but only when necessary. So moving away from the assumption that just because we have a landscape, we have to irrigate it. And instead going, if I've got healthy soil, if I'm selecting climate appropriate plants, if I'm holding on to my rain, then that need for irrigation will drop significantly. So again, herbs are plants. So these principles absolutely apply to our herbs. So they love that soil sponge. It's important that there is the proper balance of oxygen and water in the soil. Water is probably the number 1 thing that will kill our herbs. And it's easy to assume that that herb dies because it didn't get enough water, when it's actually quite possible that it's been overwatered, especially if you're working with herbs indoors. And really what we're looking for is that sweet spot where you've got enough water, you've got enough oxygen, and that creates the perfect opportunity for our biology, our healthy biology, to develop so that we can feed our plants properly. And then I mentioned oxygen, and especially if what you're doing is you're taking out turf and you want to put in a vegetable bed, or you want to put in an herb garden, odds are that your soil is compacted. So it's quite possible that you could put compost and sheet mulch on top of it, and eventually the biology in the soil will improve that quality. It will become more porous, but it's possible that in the beginning that you're going to have to break it up just a little bit. But the key thing is that you break it up 1 time, and then you don't have to touch it again. It's really quite amazing what can be done if we provide the right ingredients, what nature can then go ahead and do on her own afterwards. So you break it up with a shovel or with one of these forks, you compost, you sheet mulch, and then you are creating the good, the healthy environment for your herbs to thrive. And then as far as the watering, certainly you can have an irrigation system, but there's something really special about hand watering herbs and edibles. And it's that there's an opportunity to get in there with the plant, especially with herbs, which have incredible scents to them, right? To be able to, smell wafts of it as you're watering your mints, or you're watering your thymes, or what have you. And that as you're watering, you're taking a little bit, or you're sniffing a little bit, or you're tasting a little bit. It creates just a more intimate relationship with your garden. Now, if you are going to be irrigating, then we definitely recommend that you use drip irrigation. So the idea with drip irrigation is the water is applied much more slowly, and it's applied directly to your plant roots. So we're not creating lots of opportunity for weeds to come up because the entire garden is being watered. Because we're applying water more slowly, the soil has the opportunity to absorb that water. So the water that we are applying is being used much more efficiently. And then the other thing we want to do, and we don't always think about it, is we want to encourage our roots to go down. So with turf and with soils that tend to be compacted under turf, not under turf, with plants that tend to be compacted under the turf, people will dig it up and they'll go, oh, those roots only go 2 or 3 inches deep. But that's not true. Plants have the ability to send roots down many, many feet. And the thing about the roots is, yes, they are there to help anchor the plant, but it's also about the relationship between the roots and the biology in the soil. So the deeper those roots go, the more biology is available, and the deeper those roots grow, the more water that plant has access to. So imagine that image on the left, your roots go down 2 or 3 inches. That is how much water it has access to, compared to the image on the right. I'm going down maybe 18 inches, and that's how much water I have access to. You can imagine that you're going to be able to water that plant much less frequently, right? Deeper roots, access to more water, less frequent waterings. And then we want to mulch. So very quickly, the soil dries out, it gets hot, it gets stressed. And one of the incredibly easy, inexpensive things that we can do is apply mulch. So in the beginning, when your plants are little, it's not a lot, but as your plants start to come in, you can apply thicker layers. The mulch is super important for keeping that soil cool, for keeping it moist. And very importantly, as that mulch is breaking down, it's actually feeding the biology in the soil. So you don't need to apply fertilizers. The idea is, we apply natural elements, we apply compost, we apply mulch, and we can do away with all those other chemical inputs. All right, so let's get into looking at herbs as part of the landscape. So you can absolutely create an herb garden that is dedicated to herbs. And depending on what your aesthetics are, there's lots of different patterns that you can use. This is from Sissinghurst, so we're definitely looking at an English garden where you've got these very delineated borders. And then within that, you've got the herbs. So you can actually create the borders out of herbs. And then fill it in, or you can do something, in this case it's boxwood, so you can do these boxwood hedges, and then it is filled in with lavender. And then in the middle, those pink puffs there, those are alliums, so those are forms of onions. Another thing that's fun to do, and there's definitely, again, as you start thinking about herbs, there's all of these different creative opportunities. So it's not simply that you are planting herbs, but is there something that you would like to create in the design of that? So we also now look at what they used to do with the old monasteries, where they were working gardens. So they were edible gardens, they were herb gardens, they would use them for food, they would definitely use them for medicinal purposes, for religious purposes. And the thing, what's the word? The principles of these types of gardens is they are very geometric. So it's circles, squares, triangles. The thing about a monastery is that they are enclosed. So this idea of a cloistered area. So maybe there's a patio that you can work with where you could create an herb garden in the middle of it. And then, of course, as you think about it, making sure that it is easily accessible. Because you want to be able to go in and pick your herbs, not just look at how beautiful they are. So easily accessible, geometric in shape. So you've got patterns and you've got rhythms, and it's definitely something fun to explore and play with. And then you can use them the way you would use other plants in the landscape. So yes, you can obviously have a dedicated herb garden, but you can also integrate the herbs in the rest of your garden. So in this example, we wanted to go ahead and frame a focal point. So a focal point can be a fountain, it can be a tree, it can be a statue, it can be a vista, it can be your house. And so the idea is that as you are wanting to bring people's attention to that focal point, that you can go ahead and use herbs as part of the design consideration. And then herbs are great along paths. So maybe it is a path to the garage, a path to the kitchen, a path to the front yard, path to the side yard. And all along that path, there are herbs. So that you are no longer simply walking from point A to point B, but you are having an experience. That you can stop and pick a little lavender, to smell, or pick a little thyme to put in your soup or what have you. But that idea again of shifting the way that we look at our gardens as experiential and not simply observed. And then accents. So these pink puffs again are the allium. So that's where your garlics are, your onions are. And when we think of those, we tend to think of them only with what's underground, what I'm going to use in my cooking. But in reality, the flowers that they send up are pretty spectacular. And then they attract pollinators. So this is borage, which you can use in salads. You can actually stir fry it, and it is an incredible attractor to bees in particular. So especially these days, as we are losing our colonies, anything that we can do to support the bees is definitely welcome on many, many levels. And then hedges. So we tend to assume that herbs are small and low growing, but in fact, they can actually be small trees can be used as herbs. And as such, they can be used as different forms in the landscape. So in this example, we have an upright rosemary that serves as a hedge. So this would be great as you're walking along your path. You can also use it if you wanted to create a planter bed, that your border could be rosemary instead of boxwood. So basically the entire planting area is now usable. And then this one is so much fun. The idea of being able to have a path that is filled with herbs. So this is thyme. You can do it with oregano. You can do it with chamomile. Actually, I'm going to show you a picture of the chamomile in just a minute. And it blooms. And when you step on it, it just smells amazing. Here's the chamomile. So there's a lot of conversation about taking out turf, replacing it with other plants. You can absolutely replace it with California natives, but you can also replace it with herbs, or portions of your turf can be replaced with herbs. So chamomile for chamomile tea. And then trailing on walls. So in this case, it's a beautiful wall, but maybe you have a wall that's looking a little dilapidated or it needs paint job. The possibility again so this is a prostrate rosemary. This is a prostrate rosemary, tumbling over the wall. And so it softens these hard edges. It's also great as a ground cover. You can plant one and they grow 6 to 7 feet wide and very, very resilient with little blue flowers. One of my favorite herbs. And then certainly if you have an edible garden, they make great companion plants. We'll talk about that towards the end, the way that you can bring in herbs to keep pests out, to bring in the beneficial insects. So you can do that with a large garden, and you can absolutely do it with a small garden. So maybe you've got a tomato plant and a cucumber plant, and then you've got your basil, and there is supper, right? Tomatoes and basil and olive oil and salt, and mozzarella. Obviously, I haven't had dinner yet, but the idea that it doesn't take much to create something that's really quite delectable. And then the other really great thing about herbs is that they are wonderful for small spaces, especially our smaller ones. You can pot them. You can literally have an entire culinary opportunity in 6 pots. and they are great in pots. And again, there's so much opportunity to play and be creative because they tend to stay small. You can put them in smaller pots, you can organize them in different patterns, and yeah, you're just gonna have fun. And then we talked about bringing herbs indoors. So herbs work great indoors, and most herbs are going to like quite a bit of sunlight. So you need to find an area where they will get sunlight. You need to be careful about having them right in front of the glass if you've got like southern or western exposure, because it can actually get quite toasty on your little plants. And then a couple things you need to be careful of is the drainage. So we talked about water being the number 1 culprit, especially with plants indoors, because they are sitting in trays. So I don't know how many plants I killed because what'll happen is I water them and then I don't drain the water out of the tray. And then you've got a pot sitting in a tray filled with water and your soil stays wet and mucky. And when you have a situation like that where you don't have enough oxygen in there, you have too much water, you create the opportunity for what we call anaerobic life, which is where you start getting your pathogens and your diseases. So grow your herbs indoors, just make sure they are well drained and that they're not in direct light. All right, onward. So we're now going to look at garden themes. What do I mean by that? So, wow, there is a plethora of herbs, and I had so much fun as I was putting this presentation together to just research herbs and all the different ways that they can be organized and welcomed into the landscape. So we're going to start out with one that's definitely fun, and that is, how might you want to organize your herbs in the garden from an edible point of view? So the one that most of us are probably familiar with are herbs that come from the Mediterranean. So these are your parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. They wrote a song about it. It also includes our basil, our marjorams, our oreganos, our tarragons, and quite a few more. These are plants that, for the most part, like that bright light, can tolerate quite drought-tolerant, dry conditions, are pungent, and there's just so much that you can do with them. And we thought it would be interesting to explore just a taste of herbs from other parts of the world. And this isn't this again, this, to talk about the rest of the world and herbs, it's literally a drop in a bucket of what is possible. But the idea is maybe to inspire you to do some exploring. So Asian herbs. And what's interesting was even though herbs, we've put them in particular categories of Middle East or Mediterranean or Asian, is that they traveled. So yes, you will find them in Asia, but you will also find them in Latin America. You will find them in Europe, but you will also find them in India. So these are not static things, and they're used in all different kinds of cooking. So ginger, all the different recipes you can think of. So this is a plant that, again, you're going to be looking at the root in order to access. And then here's another one. We tend to think of mint, but there is a different version of it. It's actually a different family, this Vietnamese mint, the laksa leaf. So it can be used for very similar uses. And then turmeric. So this is one of those plants that's supposed to be tasty and then so good for your health as well and your immune system and inflammation. So again, you can see it has a very tropical look to it. It's got these big leaves, so you can imagine how, if there was something that you wanted to create in the garden, a look that was perhaps a little bit more tropical, that why not include some turmeric in there. And then one of the things we added was what these herbs actually taste like. Because if you've never tried them, you're going to look at it and go, well, it looks pretty. Color is gorgeous of it once you cut it off. But what does it actually taste like? And I'll have to say that describing a flavor is very similar to describing a color. So we did our best. And then here's one more, the scallion. So this is in that allium family with the onions and with the garlics. And again, you've got these lovely flowers. You can eat the greens, and then they actually propagate very easily as well. All right, let us move to Latin America now. And again, all the different countries and cultures and climates in Latin America, to try to pick 4 sample herbs was a challenge. But again, just to inspire you, to excite you. So this one was a surprise. This is the stevia. So when you are looking for a sugar alternative, this is a plant that you could literally take a leaf off and drop into your tea, drop into your coffee. You know, we buy it from the grocery store, but you could actually grow your own. Here's another one that's lots of fun. It's fun to say, the pepicha. And the flavor is, it's citrusy with a bit of pine and mint. So this is something that perhaps you're adding to a soup or you're sprinkling onto a salad. And it is a lovely, delicate looking plant. So yes, it has its use, and you can enjoy it in the landscape as well. And then Mexican mint marigold. This is an incredibly drought tolerant plant. I had this in my garden for years. I never took care of it, and it just did its thing. And the smell of it is incredible. You just brush by it and it's like, and it is the scent of tarragon and a licorice anise flavor. And again, you can sprinkle it in your salads. And now on to African herbs and all the different countries in Africa. I picked 3 examples. So this one is the rooibos. For those of you that have had a rooibos tea, this is what the plant actually looks like. It's a beautiful plant with those little yellow flowers. And then they go ahead and make the teas out of it. The Ashanti pepper. This, by looking at it, you would go, this potentially would require a little bit more water, probably also happier in a more filtered light. So, you know, if you live in Woodland Hills and you're out in the blazing sun, probably wouldn't do so well, but it might be lovely under a tree, for example, where there's filtered light, and then you've got the seeds from it to make your pepper. And then this last one, this Nigella, which again, this is a plant I had only ever thought of as a landscape plant. It's a lovely plant. You've got these beautiful blue flowers, these lacy leaves, but it can be used as a condiment, and it's found in flatbreads, vegetable dishes, and spice blends. So you look at it and you go, wow, landscape plant and all of these additional benefits. And then herbs from the Middle East. So there's this fenugreek, this lovely, delicate little plant. And when it's cooked, a slightly nutty maple syrup-like flavor. Fascinating. And the part of me that wonders, you know, as I look at these different herbs, how did they figure it out? You know, did it accidentally fall into the fire and then they pulled it out and they tasted it? That whole process of how did we discover what we could use, how it could be used, just as a human species. Sumac. This is a wonderful, and this is like a small tree, the sumac, and it's a wonderful flavor, especially with rices. You would sprinkle it over your rice to flavor it, and you've got the flower there. It's got a sharp lemon-like flavor, and then the anise. So this one looks very, very similar to the fennel. The seeds, if you've ever been to a Persian restaurant or a Middle Eastern restaurant, as you're leaving, they'll often offer you a small tray with those seeds in it, and it's a way of clearing the palate. And then this flower shape is an incredible pollinator attractor to your butterflies, this umbel-shaped flower. So those were our edibles. If we wanted to create a theme garden, potentially each section was a different part of the world. If you wanted to do something like that, or, you could have thyme in one area, the sumac in another. It all depends on what you want to experience and experiment with. So the next theme that you could have would be teas. So the tea as we know it, the true tea, if you will, actually comes from a plant that is related to the camellia. So any of these others, if you were to say, I'd like a mint tea or I'd like a rooibos tea, they're not true teas, they are rather infusions. So that you're going to take these plants and you're going to steep them in water until you are able to pull out the flavors. So again, many, many different types of teas, different flavors, and a lot of them also have that additional medicinal benefit to it. So we've got a list of some of them here. They include the mints, and with mint, you've got spearmint, and you've got peppermint, and there's a chocolate mint on top of it. So lots of different ways to experiment there. The lavender. So lavender, talk about a multi-purpose plant that you can make a lavender tea. You can mix them up. You can do all your own tea blends if you like. And then you add, the stevia is very, very strong. You add literally just a leaf or half a leaf, and then you have sweet tea. And a tip as you are harvesting your teas is it's approximately 3 teaspoons of leaf per cup of tea. They recommend you gather it early when the flavor is the most intense and that you don't crush the leaves. You want to be able, again, to have those natural oils be able to seep into the water rather than to get wrung out on your fingers. So next up, and this part of it is just, again, I find this whole world of herbs absolutely fascinating. But before there was Western medicine, we were reliant on plants for our healing. And so it includes, this is, again, I'm going to show you a couple more slides. There are so many different things, but the idea of, instead of going to your medicine cabinet, you go out to the garden in order to find some of the plants and their properties that will heal our very common ailments. So if you have issues with a sore throat, upset stomach, if you want to support your blood sugar, even putting things on wounds, lots and lots of different plants. Now, obviously, with all of this, you want to make sure you know what you're doing and how much of it you can take and whether it's something to be ingested or something to be put on your skin. Definitely requires a little bit of knowledge and understanding, but it is there for you. Here's some other ones. You hear it all the time, the chicken soup. One of the reasons the chicken soup is so good for a cold or a flu is because you're putting in garlic in there, you're putting in onion in there, and all of those are really good in supporting the immune system. Ginger is well known for the upset stomach. If you're going to go on a boat, you take a little one of those ginger drops, and then thyme is actually antibacterial. So very, very fascinating there. Okay, so now we're going to move on to selecting herbs. So as we mentioned at the beginning, as we're picking our herbs, obviously it's how we're going to use our herbs. That is probably our first question, or all the different ways we're going to use the herbs. But one of the other questions is, what does that herb require in order to sustain it? So we've talked about soil and we've talked about water kind of generically. But let's take a look at herbs and how much water they would actually require. So we've got a range here. On the far left, we have turf. Turf is a high water user, which is one of the reasons there's a lot of rebates out there in order to remove the turf and replace them, perhaps with herb gardens. And then as you look at your low and very low water users, those are the plants that don't require a lot, that are adapted to our climate. So they're adapted to the amount of rain that we get. And so as you're picking your plants, this may be one of the things that you want to consider. And so what we'll tend to see is that for the most part, when you're looking at perennials, so those are plants that will come back year after year, or they may go dormant and then come back, but you don't have to reseed them. They typically will require less water than an annual. So an annual is something that you will need to reseed every year or every season. So we're going to look at some examples of herbs these are perennials. They don't require a lot of water. You can basically use them as ground cover. That's what I do. Thyme is another one. So these are some of the Mediterranean ones that we've looked at, very low water user. Rosemary is another one, and you can see on both the thyme and the rosemary, they also have flowers on them. So you've got the green and then you've got the color. Lemon verbena, this one makes for a great tea. I just love rubbing it because it smells so fantastic. You can put it in things like soaps and salves. And then you've got your mints. So this one's a little bit of a hybrid because the mint really is more of a perennial, but it doesn't like that intense heat. So it's definitely going to be much happier in filtered light or in morning sunshine. And it does like more water, although I have found, again, depending on where you live, that they can as they get established, they can tolerate a little bit less water. A thing about mint is it is invasive, so make sure that you know where you're putting it and where it might grow. Cilantro. So cilantro is it's an annual. And the thing about cilantro is the same plant will give you cilantro, which is the herb, but it will also give you from the seeds coriander, which is the spice. Annual, high-ish water user. Parsley is another one that is a higher water user. And you can mix them up. So, if you've got thyme and then you've got parsley next to it, you give the parsley a little bit of extra water. The more variety you have in your garden, the more densely the plants are planted, actually will help you in conserving water. Now, this one's interesting because we call the class Herbs Beyond Basil, but there are different kinds of basils, and some of them requires more water than others. So this Thai basil is actually more of a perennial. It's great, obviously, in Asian food. It's got definitely this bite to it. You've got sweet basil, which is the one most of us think about. That's the one you put with your tomatoes and mozzarella. But then you've got a lemon basil, a Greek basil, and a purple basil, and those are all medium ET. So ET stands for evapotranspiration, if I didn't explain that before, and it's basically low ET is a low water user, high ET is a high water user. Now chives. So these you could literally just snip, put into your frying pan, high water user. Okay, growing and propagating. So we're going to start out with growing I would say what people typically think of as herbs. So typically they are annuals, and because they're annuals, they're going to require a little bit more water. When we're looking at annuals, the lifespan is anywhere between 6 to 12 months. They like warmer weather, they like sunshine, they like good soil that is well draining. All of our herbs, all of our plants like well draining soils. Nothing likes to sit in compacted, heavy, muddy soil. And so if you are going to plant them, if you're going to start them out, you need to make sure that the soil is relatively loose. It's hard to get seeds started when your soil is really either really heavy or really compacted, right? Because you get these baby little roots. And then as far as the water, we want it moist, but not soggy. So imagine a sponge where you've squeezed the water out. That is how much water we want in the soil, not the sponge full of water, but the sponge after it's been wrung out. And then a little bit of mulch, probably just a little bit of compost. And then as it starts to grow in, you can add the mulch. Some things to think about as you are growing your herbs, and you can grow them in pots, you can grow them outdoors, you can grow them in little starter trays and then transplant them. Something to think about, this is our typical basil here, is as your herbs start growing in, you're going to harvest them. The more you harvest them, the bushier they get. So that is one way to sort of increase your yield, so to speak. But other things to think about is as your herbs start to grow in, at least these annuals, at a certain time in their life, as they start getting ready to go to seed, they're going to do what's called bolting. So they're going to send up a flower, and then those flowers eventually will become the seeds. It is possible to delay that process because once they bolt, the flavor changes. You're not really going to want to be able to harvest too much more after that. And it means basically they're done. So sometimes they will bolt if it gets hot really, really quickly, but also just, it's the end of their life period. So one thing you can do is pinch that stalk as it comes up and you'll get more bushiness. Or at a certain point, when it's done, you're going to let it flower, you're going to let it go to seed, and then we're going to go ahead and show you how to harvest those seeds in just a moment. And then basically once it's gone to seed, that's it. You're going to, cut it, put it in the compost pile. Now, it's also possible to propagate herbs via cuttings. So this is something that's super easy to do with friends, with neighbors, to snip a cutting and share or exchange. And there's two different ways that we're going to talk about it. So one of them is propagating herbs from what we call soft stemmed, and then one that is more from the woody stemmed. So for cuttings that are soft stemmed, we're actually going to root them by putting them in water. So a couple of things to think about. So we've got a diagram there. You've got your plant. What we want to make sure is that we remove all of the excess leaves before we put it in the water. So it's really just going to be the bare stem that's going to go in. Give yourself a nice chunk to work with, right? You don't want like a little itty bitty, 4, 6, 5, 6, 7 inches to work with. You're going to go ahead and put it in a sunny windowsill, so they are going to want light. And you want to make sure that you change the water every so often. Once the water gets a little bit mucky, again, what you've got is some of those not necessarily pathogens in there, but biology in there that you don't really want growing. So every couple of days, dump it out, put in some fresh water. It will take a few days, maybe a couple of weeks to root, depends on the plant, depends on the settings. And then once you've got some roots, you can go ahead and put it in the ground. So a couple things to point out in terms of where to snip it. You can see on the plant itself, the node is where all the leaves gather. And you want to cut right below that. So you cut right below that, and then you strip all the leaves underneath that cut. Then the other thing that we can do is that we can propagate from woody plants. So woody plants, instead of going in the water, we're going to go into the soil. So we've got rosemary here that we're going to go ahead and work with. Again, we're looking at 4 to 6 inches, wanting to make sure that it has not started to flower. The reason being is that once a plant goes to flower, that's where its energy is. It's going to flower and eventually it's going to go to seed. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to take that energy and apply it to growing the roots. So make sure you've got no buds. Cut it 4 to 6 inches. You're still going to strip away some of those bottom leaves, but what we're going to do this time is we're going to dip it in a rooting hormone, and we're going to go ahead and put it directly into a well-draining soil. And then what you're going to do, it'll take a little bit of time as those roots start to get established, but maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks, you're actually going to start to transit. So it's almost like working with a baby. We're going to transition it from the home out to preschool. So what we're going to do is it has to get that transition from sort of a protected environment to one that might be a little bit more challenging. So in the beginning, the first couple of days, you're going to go ahead and take it outside during the daytime, put it in partial shade so that you don't have any like blaring sun on it. Bring it inside at night when it might be a little bit cooler. Do that for a few days. And then the next time you take it out, maybe instead of the filtered light, you take it out where there's a bit more sunlight. And then eventually, over the course of a week, your plant has transitioned, and you can go ahead and ideally you've started it in those little starter packs. Egg crates will work, where you can go ahead and just put it directly in the soil. If not, you just have to be careful as you are taking that plant and the soil around it and then transplanting it. So if you want to go ahead and propagate herbs from seeds, again, the easiest is if you can get the little seed starters that are biodegradable. So you can just put it right in the ground. So they come in newspaper, they come in peat pots. You're going to go ahead and fill it again with this loose soil. We're going to moisten it. So it's easier if it's moistened in the beginning, and then rather than trying to water it and get it moist. And then you go ahead and poke holes. Now, depending on the seeds, they are microscopic, some of them. So sometimes it's just like you sort of take your finger and you create a little concave area, and then you put more soil on top of it. 2 to 3, cover it with soil. Again, the idea that you keep that soil moist, but not soggy. You're going to mist it, so one of those misters, because if you take a watering can, something like that, you're basically just going to flood your seeds potentially right out of those starters. So we also talk about a humidity dome. So that can be something as simple as a plastic bag, or one of those cake domes that you can put on top of it. But the idea is that it just helps that water evaporate a little less quickly. So in fact, you'll get a little bit of condensation. It just keeps the whole environment a little bit more moist. Then from there, you're going to see them come up. It's very exciting when those first ones come up. And you can start to see the leaves. The possibility of using a half-strength fish emulsion or worm casting. So we're giving it a little bit of extra nutrients there to get that biology started. And then you're going to need to thin them out, because each one of these becomes an entire plant. So the possibility, if you've got 3 or 4 of them, that you thin it down to maybe 1 or 2. And then same process as far as the hardening off. Maybe you wait till they get a little bit larger, and then you use that process to transition them out to the garden. And then the possibility of harvesting your own seeds. So lots of different things that you can do. But it's not like you're going to stand there waiting with a cup for those seeds to pop out. So there's actually, whether or not it's plastic bag or it's a little fabric bag that you can go ahead, tie around the area that's about to burst. And then when they do, you are able to capture those seeds. Now, there's a list here. This, again, is by no means all of the different herbs, but just a list of the ones that are easier to root in water compared to those that are better to root in soil. And then the ones that have asterisks are ones that you can actually root in either scenario. So root in water, you can go ahead and root a lemon verbena or an oregano directly into the soil. You can do the stevias, the lavenders, the tarragons. All right, so the last piece of the puzzle, which is how to prepare them. We've got a few minutes left. If you have any outstanding questions, ask them now. All right, so this last piece of the puzzle, preparation and more. So if you wanted to take an herb right out of your garden, it would probably be good for maybe, I don't know, a week or so in the refrigerator. Like sometimes you can put your parsley in a cup of water, put it in the refrigerator. It's good for maybe a week, and maybe a little bit longer. But if you dry your herbs, they're actually good for anywhere between 1 and 3 years. So the shelf life on an herb is pretty significant. Like, I don't know how many times you've pulled out a jar of herbs that's been sitting there for a very long time and wondering if it was still good. They don't go bad It's more that the flavor just becomes a little less intense with time. So some of the different ways that you can do that, literally, you can hang them up by a string in a cool, dry place. If you have a dehydrator, you can use that. You can also dry them in the oven. The challenge with that is it does have to be a very, very low heat. Otherwise, instead of drying them, you will be cooking them. If you have spices, so again, looking at the spices, that's the woody part or the seeds. In some cases, they are better off if they are dried before you grind them. But as far as grinding, you can use the old-fashioned mortar and pestle. You can use a coffee grinder. You can put them in one of those little mini grinders, like a Cuisinart or what have you. And again, that is how you access that flavor. And then as far as the herbal teas, the infusions, those are going to be in water. You can certainly do it with fresh leaves. You can also do it with dried leaves. You can do it in warm water. Typically, it's warm water. You don't usually want to use boiling water, but I would say very hot water. With some of them, you can actually do it. They talk about doing a sun tea. You can do the same thing with your herbs. And then you've got the idea of being able to use the herbs and then infusing them into oils. So imagine being able to make massage oils or cooking oils. The best ones to work with, because they don't go rancid as quickly, are the olive oil and the coconut. The same idea is that the oil is warm, don't want it boiling. You can put it on the stove top, low heat, and you can add your herbs. I've done that many, many times. So you put in some rosemary, some thyme, some oregano, and then you strain the herbs and you just have this scented oil to put over whatever it is that you're preparing. And then it starts to get a little bit more technical as far as actually being able to pull essential oils out of the plants, but this is where perfumes come from and aromatherapy, and you put it in the salves, you put it in the lip balms, so that you are actually able to pull those oils out of the plants, and then you put it in some form of carrier. And then this is the part that is so much fun. The idea that you can create your own products using the herbs and playing with different combinations. So you can make soaps out of it, you can make shampoos out of it, you can mix them into candles, into salves. So lots and lots of different creative ways to use these incredible plants to improve your life. And then, of course, this is the easy one, creating your potpourris with it, where you literally just cut up different herbs, lavenders, roses, put them in a pot, spread them around through the house. Of course, as you start to get very, very technical, how you start working with herbs and other plants, obviously, to create different perfumes, scents, etc. And then the last part of this is looking at herbs as pest control. So the idea is that you're bringing them in either as companion plants, so you're mixing them maybe with an edible garden. This is a great way to work with herbs. Is this part of an edible garden where you don't want them chomping on this or chomping on that? But then that you could also use some of the plants directly. So this laurel plant that you can take the leaves and you can put leaves throughout your cabinets, and it's actually a deterrent for some of those little guys that get into your flour or into your rice. The calendula is well known as a pest deterrent. And that they also work as inviting in your beneficial insects. So depending what you plant, it brings in the, well, certainly the bees, brings in spiders, brings in the praying mantis. So you've got that control happening in many, many different ways. And then once again, wrapping it up with this guide to medicinal herbs. So there's really nothing in the body that cannot be improved with or supported with the proper use of plants. plant medicine, everything from fertility to coughs, to stress reduction, to blood sugar management, and so on. So it is really just an endless exploration of all the different ways that we can bring these plants into our lives with all of their benefits. Yeah, so it looks like you got some questions.
Question.
Fire
Yeah,
away.
yeah, we had really wonderful questions. I'm going to start with a couple that I said we'd answer live. So, the first one is any tips on getting essential oils? So, that, I guess this is maybe like which plants are best for essential oils. Um, anything that you want that you can add to that.
Wow. I mean, the essential oils that there's all different kinds of things. I mean, you can get things like the eucalyptus oils that are great. Obviously, there's the rose oils, the lavender. I mean, I don't think there's a plant that you could mention that, you wouldn't be able to pull some sort of oil from. So it really depends on for what purpose you wanted to use it. There's some that you put in, they're like misters, so it actually goes out, or diffusers, it goes out into the atmosphere. Certain ones that you just rub, like I'll actually, before I go to bed, I rub a rose oil in my hands, and I'll just smell it, put it behind my neck, and it just sort of relaxes me. So yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, like commercially, there's a process. It's just like decaffeinating coffee almost, that the leaf is put through to extract the oil from it. And there are two different kinds of extraction. One is an extraction that is through that uses CO2 to take it out. That's the best way to extract, is a CO2 extractor. Another one uses I want to say it's like ethylene or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's an alcohol.
Yeah, to extract. And
Mm.
so when you look, like if you're purchasing these things, you can look, and it usually says on the bottle what the extraction process is. Um, so, and it makes a difference just in the long life of it, if whether it will keep,
Mhm.
it keeps better CO2 extraction. So anyway, that is something with, yeah, medicinal herbs I mean, oils are
Mm.
fantastic, fantastic. Okay, let me just see. Can you think of any books beyond the one that you recommended that we want to tell people? Or maybe we can't think of them right off the top of our head, but this is to assure people that when the webinar goes up on the on-demand site, there will
Right.
be resources
Yeah,
also
yeah,
added to the class. So
yeah,
it's not just the video, it's also other resources that will help you along your journey.
yeah.
Let's see. Uh, okay, I have a small area for herbs. What do you suggest? It's a small area, and I do have squirrels and birds in my yard daily. What would you start with?
Wow. I would probably, so I'm going to assume that there's sunshine, right? In this small garden. Yeah, yeah.
I think
So
you have to start with that assumption.
yeah,
Yeah.
we'll start with, because if there's not, then it's sort of, you go off into different. So I would actually probably start with the Mediterranean ones, the more pungent ones. Um, the rosemaries, the oreganos, the marjorams. I would start with that because I don't think squirrels are very interested in that. Um, Birds, not so much. I mean, it's not like there's seeds there that they're going after. Squirrels are after, nuts. There's nothing really edible for them there. So yeah, I think you'd be fine.
So I have a little suggestion that I talked about actually
Uh-huh.
in answers, and that is, if you have a small area or you know, like you want to make an herb garden, but you don't really want to like, you know, create like a massive herb garden. One thing you can do is you can get unglazed clay containers and plant your herbs into that container, and then put those containers in the landscape. So you put the container, you could do one of two things. You can either move the container around in the landscape where you actually just have it sitting on the ground, or you can make it kind of semi-permanent, at least permanent for the summer, where you bury it about a third of the way into the soil. And what this does is it allows the plant to actually, especially if you have either an annual or a tender perennial that is going to do all this growth in the summertime, it'll go down through the hole in the bottom of the container and it will actually be able to access the soil so it gets, you know, more of what it needs during the growing season. It doesn't dry out as quickly. And it allows you to potentially cut the base off in the fall and take that container inside for a little while. So it's a way to, you know, kind of have this herb garden. And the other thing is you don't even have to bury it in the ground. You could just place it on top of the ground and mulch heavily around the container. And this way, you know, you can experiment. Like you can see, oh, does this thing work here or should it move over here? And you're not, you know, having to dig things up or move things around or whatever. Or you can just move the container. So that's one way to use herbs in the landscape. What about shady, foggy gardens?
Mint.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that's something you definitely want to put in a
In a
container.
pot. Yep. Yep.
100%. With
Yeah.
You want to put that in a pot, but with the hole covered.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
cover the hole, even if it's just with like
Yeah.
duct tape or something, inside and out. Cover that hole because that
Yeah.
mint plant will go
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would think some of the, I mean, it's a little there, like everything, there's a spectrum because you think some of those herbs, even though they like the sun, they, you know, like a parsley or a basil could take some of that, you know, a little bit more fog as long as they got some sunshine at some point in the day. I would lean probably more towards the annuals as far as something that would be able to tolerate those conditions.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I keep talking about unglazed pots, and so people are asking why unglazed pots.
Yep.
The terracotta unglazed pots can both get water from, like if you're burying them in the ground, they can both get water from the surrounding soil if it's wet, and uh, it has just a better air exchange. One of the number one reasons why container plants die is because they get too wet.
Mm.
They the when it's glazed and sealed, the water. So you know, if you're doing like a huge container in your landscape or on a patio, then you want to have a glazed container because you want to hold in as much moisture as you possibly can. And you plant that in a particular way to make it so that it drains okay. But if you're talking about like an herb container, I'm talking about a single plant in a single container, um, then I want to have unglazed because glazed, it's likely that I will overwater that plant and that's the fastest way to kill. You know, especially these more Mediterranean and dry kinds of herbs. So that's why I'm talking about unglazed. It's just easier to manage. And oh, by the way, if it does get too dry, you can take the whole darn thing and dunk it into a bucket, you know, and then it, you know, yeah, it's good. Can't do that with a glazed container. Okay, let's see. How many hours of sun do you think you need for herbs?
I would go 6 to 8. It depends on the herbs, but you know, if we're thinking of our typicals, yeah, I would go 6 to 8.
Yeah, I'm in the same camp. What are some herbs that will do well in filtered sun? Okay, so this is a recurring theme in the questions about foggy, you know,
Yeah.
um, so this is an evapotranspiration area with at like 16 inches a year. So it's really, really low evapotranspiration,
Mhm.
which means that it's very overcast, very foggy. Um, and so what kind of wells, what kind of herbs do we think would do well in those conditions beside mint?
Wow.
Other ideas.
Yeah, I'd have to think about, I mean, the challenge always with shade is the number of plants that work, especially like in a dry shade on top of it, are a little bit more challenging. So I would have to think about that one.
I mean, I think that it's not so much that it's shady as it's overcast,
Mhm.
so having it in as bright sunshine as possible, like
Yeah,
out in the open, right? So not under trees, not under whatever.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, if you want to grow something under trees, strawberry is your answer. It's not
Mhm.
really an herb, but
Right. Yeah.
that is a very good, under the tree kind of thing. And there are also, there are things like there are edibles that you can grow in a little bit more of a shady condition. They just get very leggy, right?
Mhm.
So that's the thing, is that where you don't have enough sunshine, things start to get very leggy. So you might have to be kind of cutting them back to try to keep stimulating, more growth from them to try to make them a little bushier.
Mhm.
So, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's all.
And I think, and also like, because another one that it's certainly, I use in my garden is the thyme. So I've got that under a tree. So it may be that it's going to go searching, or you don't get the same kind of bloom that you would get in a sunnier situation. Um, and the growth may not be quite as lush or as quick. Um, but it's not like it's going to kill it. Yeah, I think so. It's not going to kill it. You just won't get quite the size perhaps, or the leaf growth.
Yeah.
I would experiment. I mean, and that's the thing about herbs is they are cheap.
Yeah.
Just play. And the idea of doing it in pots, you can move it around. So maybe even if it is overcast, that there are different parts of the garden where you get, the sun breaks through a little bit more quickly, or um
Or you get, like, a western wall, a southern wall.
mhm,
The south parts of your garden, the west parts of your garden, these are better places because there's going to be more heat. Like classic places up against a wall that's got a driveway next to it, and it's like a southern exposure,
right,
western
yeah,
exposure. Even if you're in a more foggy and overcast
mhm,
kind of situation, that extra heat helps. I mean, if you think about the walled gardens in Europe, uh, you know, it was these are very, the English gardens especially, these are really shady, foggy places,
mhm,
where they used the walled gardens to hold the heat in the garden so that they could get a longer life on the edibles that they planted there and on the flowers that they planted there. So, I mean, you can use that same strategy.
yeah. And along the same lines, white walls. So if there's
Yes,
points where you get that reflected light on top of it.
yeah. So these are all like little extra strategies for helping boost the ambient lighting, and don't forget, light is um, it's particles. It's not just like direct light that
Mhm.
it actually, an open space can give you a lot of light. Um, okay, so one final thing, and I'm going to see if I can get this answered right. So, uh, if we have a greenhouse, and we open the windows, are we going to be able to draw in pollinators? It's a good question.
That is a good question.
I think so. I mean, I think that you do have to leave them open during the day because the bees are pollinating during the day. And they actually, you should do a little research because I don't recall what um, the timing is, but different times of the day, different flowers are
Mm.
visible. two bees. So, there's the blue flower time and the red and the, whatever, yellow, white. So yeah, you should take a look at that. But definitely planting, flowering things like, like thyme is excellent. And even uh what's another really floriferous herb that you can think of? Because it has a lot of flower beside like lavenders and things like that.
I'm looking at the alliums right behind you.
Oh yeah, alliums. But yeah, so planting and doing
Rosemary actually is pretty.
yeah, rosemary and
Mhm.
and even planting more companion plants that you may not think of as herbs. Because you're not immediately like calendula, it is an herb.
Right.
Um, it's just that it's like you don't really think about using calendula, you
Yeah.
know.
And
But
violets, actually, as far as the shade, are violets.
yeah, violets. Oh, they're fantastic. Exactly.
Yeah.
Violets are um okay. Bees sing different colors. Okay, yeah. I'll find a source for you. I mean, I referenced a lot of how insects hear and see different vibrations of different wavelengths basically. Especially sucking insects get attracted to the nitrogen wavelength in plant material. So when plants are over fertilized, they actually attract sucking insects. So you want to really not fertilize. So this is in the same vein. These bees have preferences of color at different times of day. But we'll get you some resources and put that up into the program.
Right. So anything else?
Yeah, people are enjoying the wavelengths and frequencies. I know. Okay, here's the funny thing about plants is that if you read anything from like the 1960s and the 1970s, there were all these studies being done about plants, responding to different kinds of music and different kinds of things. And it was really dismissed as like completely wacky stuff. And in large part, it was because you couldn't measure the, the, uh, with the granularity that you can now. So there was no way to measure these frequencies. There's no way to see some of the light and just all the stuff. And now we have these amazing analytic tools that allow us to see on these microscopic levels, like atomic levels. And yeah, it has really changed the way people think about plants and how they respond. So
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
going
Fascinating.
on. And the interaction with the rest of the world.
Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us tonight. As Pamela mentioned, we'll have resources as well as a link to the webinar, and we'll get that out to you. And hopefully we will see you again at our next webinar, which is actually about landscape myths and busting those myths. So hopefully you will join us for that. Have a great evening and happy gardening.
Bye.